Now, I believe one of the most regressive and insulting ideas that comes out of critical race theory, anti-racism, which is also heavily predicated upon postmodern philosophy, is the idea of racial determinism. Now, this even goes further than the collectivist kind of way of thinking that's associated with postmodernism, which suggests that, well, people are not just individuals, but they are inextricably tied to the circumstances of disadvantages that are correlated between different groups and other groups through the history of power dynamics of people and nations and so forth. But what I think it takes a further step in that it disqualifies us from the innate and kind of inborn and inalienable rights that have been so articulated in our American Constitution and in our American way of life and civics. That is, we take upon looking at an individual as being capable of the pursuit of their own happiness and capable of pursuing and achieving their own outcomes in life. But the idea of collectivism, which then goes even further to this kind of racially deterministic way of looking at the world, says, no, well, you don't have that kind of agency. Your outcomes and your life are much more predicated upon the disadvantages that your group is associated with. Now, I can't think of anything more damaging to not just the average everyday American, whether they're black or white, but particularly to minorities. And, not even to stop there, because this kind of ideology has been besieged upon women and also gays and whoever else becomes a suggested ally or is connoted as a marginalized person amongst the groups characterized by postmodernists, anti-racist, critical race theorists, and the slew of categorizations that come out of progressive movements in and outside of the academy now. The lines are starting to blur whether this is just an academic thing or it's actually become more of a populist kind of movement. But I don't know how much even I have to explain about how that kind of way of thinking is such a detriment to individuals. How it's rather actually even insulting to say such a thing. How that just dehumanizes the aspects of agency that we would want to maintain for ourselves. I think notions of this sort, this idea that we are racially determined, that is, if you're black in America, then you can only make it so far because of all the institutional powers that are set against you, because of your history and because of aspects of American history. And I don't know of anything worse we could not only tell ourselves, but that we could tell our children. And I would go as far as to say that that kind of way of thinking, that kind of ideology, that kind of narrative is something rather close to child abuse. And it's rather interesting that, and I don't say that to be extreme, but I think it's quite funny in that that's completely opposite of the kind of mantras that we try to instill in our children, especially in the mainstream media. That is, it's oftentimes said that, well, you can be anything you want to be. Reach for the stars. You have all the potential. Your life is up to you. But when it comes to minorities, when it comes to blacks, when it comes to certain groups which are associated with these movements, then they don't have any of those qualifications. They say, no, well, actually, your life is determined. Your life is determined specifically by the negative aspects of your history, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with this interpretation. This is the way it is, and these are the circumstances of which you're subject to. So I think if anything, that needs to stop and anything that needs to be looked at in terms of these movements and how they can be destructive. This aspect of not just racial determinism, but I think determinism in a kind of form, because it pervades this idea that now individuals are circumstantially inferior. So, which is not quite unlike from dehumanizing notions of blacks or women or whoever else being inferior in times past. But now you're just giving this kind of a new name, a new moniker, a new categorization, saying that no, these people aren't just inherently inferior. Now they're circumstantially inferior. I don't see that that solves the problem at all. I think it actually recreates the problem in many ways, makes it worse, especially given the fact that we are not living today in any of these circumstances and conditions that can be associated with the lifestyles that were led in previous times in history when we were actually deemed inferior. But today, we're oftentimes categorized as inferior, circumstantially inferior, by not the people that are opposed to us, but by the people that say they're trying to help us.